The fifth reason why we use tension is that we use tension for social signaling. Tension is something that we use to signal to other people and even to ourselves that we're working hard. We affirm our worth. We affirm the fact that we're working hard and we're really trying to do things. And we use this to signal to ourselves and to other people that this is hopefully true. I see this all the time supervising students in a student clinic and teaching different types of body work, different types of massage to students. When someone is doing some type of manual therapy on a patient, especially types of massage, and they feel like they're not really being effective, they start tensing up. They start adding tension into their body, and it seems really obvious that what they're trying to do is convince themselves and convince the patient that even if they feel like they're not being very effective, they're at least really trying very hard. I still, after being an acupuncturist for 20 years and focusing mostly on physical medicine, I still catch myself doing this sometimes. As soon as there's any anxiety about how effective my treatment is becoming, I'll start letting tension creep into my system and some kind of weird attempt at convincing myself that I'm at least trying. And there are lots of other ways that we use tension to signal different things to other people and to ourselves. I would probably add to that quote from Alexander earlier and say that not only is it that relaxation is who we are and tension is who we think we are, but the tension is also who we want other people to think we are. I'm going to take this idea a little bit further and talk about some ideas that come from one of my favorite books of all time, which is Impro by Keith Johnstone. I don't have time to really get into all the really amazing and cool ideas in this book. It's a very short book that is ostensibly about improvisational comedy. It was written back in the 60s or the 70s, I think. So I'm just going to borrow a few of the ideas and some of the vocabulary from that book, and maybe I'll do a full video on it later on. One of the first chapters in Impro is about status and how important understanding social status, high status versus low status is if you want to either do comedy or just to create any kind of interesting, dramatic interchange, any kind of, whether you're writing a story or performing on a stage. Some of the ways that he talks about the use of status and how we portray status involve posture. And we can interpret posture here as being different types of physical tensions that we use. So there are high status postures, when people are very upright, the chest is open and expanded, we're taking up space. In extreme forms, this can be kind of a rigid military posture. There are low status postures, which are smaller, they're more collapsed, they take up less space, they are sending the signal, please ignore me, I'm not a threat, I'm not worth it. But even this kind of collapsed posture is another form of tension. It's a different set of tensions that you're using to signal to everyone around you a particular message. When you start learning how to undo unnecessary tension in your body, you're actually starting to undo some of these postural tensions that are deeply tied into your personality, to your sense of who you are. And especially to the extent that these postural tensions and tensions in how you deal with the world are ways you have of making yourself feel safe, which is what a lot of these high status or low status behaviors are, what these postures are, what these ways of creating tension in your environment so you can tell where you are, what all those are. It can start to feel very threatening as you start to get rid of some of these tensions, because it can feel literally like some part of you is being taken away or some part of you is even dying. And so what it requires in order to develop a more healthy way of utilizing tension and relaxation is a type of perceptual recalibration. You have to learn how to rely on more subtle cues from yourself and from the environment that give you the information that you want without also causing damage or long-term harm in the way that the coarser, more excessive, pathological tensions can do. So reducing harmful or excessive tensions means undergoing a kind of perceptual recalibration. And what this means is becoming more sensitive to more subtle forms of feedback from your environment and from yourself that allow you to establish your normal healthy boundaries and deal with your environment, your physical environment and the social environment in a more skillful way that isn't going to cause you problems in the long term. The sixth way that we rely on tension is to manipulate our environment. This is really exemplified in something like martial arts practice, in particular in martial arts practices such as push hands in Tai Chi Chuan. Push hands is a practice where you have two people and they are either standing in a fixed stance or they're moving around. They're touching, usually their hands or their forearms up to the elbows, although there are variations of this where you're making contact in the legs and the torso and other places in the body. And your goal is essentially to unbalance your partner, to push on them or pull on them, and to not be unbalanced yourself. There's a wide range of varieties of this practice, everything from extremely slowly and politely and softly going through different types of motions to what can end up looking like a sumo or a Greco-Roman wrestling match. So there's really a huge variety of practices that are called push hands. But they all have this same basic idea in common, that what you're trying to do is to unbalance your opponent while not being unbalanced yourself, fundamentally. So in order to do this, what you have to be able to do is what is called listening in push hands practice. The Chinese word that's used for that is the same word that means to listen to something. So what they're talking about is listening to what's happening in your partner's body. So where their weight is in their feet, where their center of mass is, where the tensions are in their body. Because what you're going to do is to use your partner's unnecessary tension essentially as a handle to hold on to them and then to manipulate that handle and unbalance them, push them, pull them, throw them down on the floor, whatever the purpose of the practice is that you're doing. At the same time, you are trying to be really relaxed and to erase as much tension as you can in your body, both so that you can listen more effectively, because it's very difficult to listen, both in this sense and even just listening with your ears, if you're listening to music or you're trying to hear something that's very quiet. It's very difficult to do that while you're being tense. Same thing if you're trying to feel tension in someone else's body as you're doing this type of martial arts practice. So you're trying to relax yourself so that you can be more receptive and more accurate in hearing the tensions, but also so that you can essentially hide what's happening inside your own body so that you're not giving your partner a handle that they can use to manipulate you, to push you, to pull you, to unbalance you. And even at more advanced levels, you can start utilizing tension to essentially mislead your partner. You can show them tension in one place, get them to try and hold on to it or push into it, and then when you have set that up and they do that, and then they've created tension in their body, you can unbalance them. So it gets into this very complex and advanced interplay between tension and relaxation between you and another person at this very intimate level. And finally, we can talk about using tension in this way of manipulating our environment in medicine, in particular in manual medicine. And really, it's not just in manipulating our environment, or in this case, a patient, but both in terms of diagnosis and therapy. So we utilize tension in diagnosis all the time. There's the tension in a patient's voice, the tension in their posture, the tension in their pulse, if you're an acupuncturist or a Chinese herbalist and feeling someone's pulse to get information. There's the tension, different lines of tension in their body that you're feeling with different types of manual assessment techniques. There's the tension in their muscles, the tension and the stiffness and resistance in their joints if you're trying to move them passively through a range of motion. So we rely on this tension all the time. And like with push hands, the more relaxed you are, the easier it is for you to pick up on and interpret different types of more subtle tensions in your patient. Therapeutically, acupuncture is in a sense based on utilizing tension, or at least some of the Chinese styles of acupuncture, where the needle is inserted into the body and it's manipulated in different ways. Rotating and lifting and thrusting the needle gets the needle bound up with some of the connective tissue, some of the fascia in the body, and the effect of the needle is partly based on how the needle, by being bound up with the connective tissue, stretches it and actually causes lines of tension to form in the connective tissue, stretching those same neurons that I talked about earlier, and sending proprioceptive signals to the rest of the body. And as an acupuncturist, also by holding onto the needle, rotating it and manipulating it, you are also diagnosing and feeling for how much tension there is in this same tissue. You're looking for changes of tension in the tissue. Very often over the course of an acupuncture treatment, the amount of tension locally in the tissue at the needling site will go down, sometimes almost immediately within 5 or 10 seconds, sometimes after the needles have been in for 30 or 40 minutes. You can go back and either by holding onto the needle and feeling how much resistance there is, or just physically touching the area with a finger, you can often notice big changes in tissue tension. And tension isn't just important at that kind of physical level. We use tension in our language all the time as Chinese medicine practitioners. One of the primary ways we look at patients and diagnose patients is by figuring out to what degree, on the one hand, there are problems that they're having that are caused by excess, meaning too much of something, versus problems that are caused by deficiency, or not enough of something. Excess problems tend to be problems of excess tension and tightness, or problems of accumulation, things that are accumulating somewhere that should be moving or circulating more. Deficiencies are usually caused by a lack of tension. They're caused by there not being enough of a particular substance, not enough of a particular resource, whether that's blood or fluids or the functional capacity or energy of a particular organ. And when we treat deficiencies, the language that we use is that we tonify deficiencies. We use tonic herbs, we use acupuncture points or other physical techniques that are meant to tonify the patient. So we are, in a sense, obsessed with balancing tension in the body in this way. The word tonify actually means to increase tone, right? Tone meaning firmness, tension, available energy in a system. One of the really helpful images that I like to use for how Chinese medicine looks at the body is that it looks at the body like it is a stringed instrument, like a guitar or a lute or a cello. So we have all of these different lines of tension running through us, kind of like guitar strings. And each one has to be at a particular tension in order for everything to be in tune and in order for the instrument to create beautiful music, which is how we end up living our lives. So Chinese medicine and acupuncture in particular is, in a sense, kind of like tuning a guitar. This is even more obvious when you do manual therapy like tuina or massage, where there are even techniques that are like plucking guitar strings or loosening strings that are too tight. It's a really helpful image to have. Thanks for sticking with me. Those are the 6 ways that I could come up with of how we rely on tension. In the next few videos, we'll talk about the relationship between tension and relaxation and awareness, and we'll eventually get into various physical practices and some perceptual practices that can help you regulate and modulate and synthesize relaxation and tension in different things that you're doing, such as Qigong, martial arts, yoga, meditation, things like that. If there are topics that you want me to talk about and to address, let me know in the comments below, or go to my website and contact me through there. You can subscribe to my newsletter, and we're going to be having conversations through the newsletter about topics that people want me to either create videos about or blog posts, some online educational opportunities that I'm planning on having in the near future. So let me know. Thanks again, and I will see you next time. I won't actually see you next time. You'll see me, but you get what I mean.